It's late, close to midnight, and I'm driving down an endless stretch of empty road, rain pounding against the windshield, every turn in the road swallowed by darkness. I'm exhausted, barely able to keep my eyes open, and as luck would have it, a neon sign appears on the side of the road, flickering through the rain. It reads, Motel Vacancy. At that moment, all I can think is how badly I need to sleep, how much I want to just pull in, lock the door behind me, and let the rain wash away every last thought. So, I take the exit and pull into the lot. Before I go deeper into the story, welcome, and make sure to subscribe to the channel, Echoes of Nightmares, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on any of the future scary tales. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button too. Also, leave a comment to let me know where you're listening from in the world. Now, back to my story. The parking lot's empty. Not a single car in sight. Just the heavy sound of rain hitting the concrete. And somewhere in the distance, a soft hum, like someone left a television on in another room. I go inside, and there's this old man at the front desk, barely looking up when I enter. He just hands me a key with a number scratched into the brass. Room 12. No words, no small talk, just the sound of the keys clinking together in his hand. I walk down the hallway, and it's strange, This thick silence, broken only by my own footsteps and the distant sound of thunder. I can't quite explain it, but the whole place feels wrong. The air is heavy, and each step makes it feel harder to breathe, like something is pressing down, waiting. When I reach my room, I unlock the door, step inside, and shut it behind me. The rain outside is the only thing breaking the silence, a steady rhythm against the window. And just as I start to settle in, there's this faint sound, almost like a tapping coming from somewhere in the room. I freeze, holding my breath, listening, but the noise stops as suddenly as it began. I brush it off as nothing, just the pipes or the wind. But somewhere deep inside, a feeling creeps in, one I can't ignore. This isn't just another night in some forgotten motel. And somehow, I know I'm not alone. I'll admit, as soon as I pulled into the motel's lot, there was something about it that just felt off. It was isolated, nothing but tall, dark trees surrounding the property, their branches swaying in the wind, throwing long, twisted shadows across the cracked pavement. The only light came from a neon sign above, sputtering weakly through the downpour, casting a sickly green glow over everything. Motel in large, blocky letters. Beneath it, vacancy, blinking erratically, almost as if it was barely holding on. The rain kept hammering down, drumming against the roof of my car as I killed the engine and sat there, staring at the building. Paint was peeling from the walls, and the wood on the stairs leading up to the rooms was cracked and warped, sagging under years of neglect. Even in the dim glow of that flickering sign, I could see patches of mold spreading across the exterior walls, dark and damp. And the smell, even through the rain, there was this faint odor of mildew and decay, like the place had been left to rot a long time ago. I almost thought about leaving right then, but where would I go? It was pitch dark, and I hadn't seen another sign of civilization in miles. I stepped out of the car and grabbed my bag, pulling my jacket close to block out the rain. The air was thick, damp, and cold, with each breath feeling heavier, almost sticky, as if the very atmosphere didn't want me there. As I made my way to the front entrance, I noticed how quiet it was. The only sounds were the rain and my own footsteps echoing through the empty lot. No cars, no lights in the windows, nothing to indicate that anyone else was here. Just me. I opened the door to the lobby, and immediately, I was hit by an even stronger smell. Stale and musty, like old, wet carpet that had been left to sit. The lobby was dimly lit, a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, barely illuminating the cramped room. A faded, yellowed sofa sat against one wall, torn and patched with duct tape, while a small TV in the corner flickered with static, its volume turned down so low it was almost silent. And then, there he was, the receptionist, an older man, thin and hunched over the desk, with deep lines etched into his face. His skin was pale, almost waxy, and he didn't look up as I entered. Just sat there, scribbling something on a piece of paper, his eyes glued to the page as if he hadn't noticed me at all. I cleared my throat, but he barely moved. It wasn't until I spoke, "I need a room for the night," that he finally looked up, his eyes dull, almost empty, like he was seeing me, but not really seeing me. He didn't say a word, just reached under the counter and pulled out a key attached to a small, worn brass tag with the number 12 scratched into it. As he handed it over, our fingers brushed, and his skin felt cold, colder than the room itself. He looked at me with this strange, detached expression, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he wanted to say something but decided against it. I forced a nod and mumbled a thanks, and without a word, he returned to his scribbling, dismissing me as if I was just another shadow passing through. I turned and made my way down the hallway, the floor creaking underfoot. The walls were lined with faded, peeling wallpaper, the kind with little floral patterns that might have been cheerful once, but now looked grimy and tired. Dim sconces cast weak pools of light along the corridor, each one flickering like it could go out at any moment. The closer I got to room 12, the heavier the air seemed to grow. The rain outside was still pounding against the roof, echoing through the walls, a steady, relentless drumbeat that made it feel like the whole building was breathing. And yet, there was something else, something in the silence between each beat, a tension that seemed to coil tighter with every step I took. I finally reached the door, a heavy, scratched thing with paint chipping around the edges and a single brass number nailed into the center. I slid the key into the lock, turned it, and the door creaked open, revealing the room beyond. It was dark, just a faint glow from the parking lot outside filtering through the curtains, casting long shadows across the bed, the table, the walls. As I stepped inside, the smell hit me first, musty, stale, like a mix of old smoke and something else, something rotten, lingering just beneath the surface. The room was small, just a single bed, a nightstand, and a chair by the window. The wallpaper was the same as in the hallway, faded and peeling, with a large, dark stain in one corner that looked suspiciously like water damage, or something worse. I set my bag down and took a deep breath, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. It was just a motel, just a place to sleep. I kept telling myself that, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this place was wrong, like it was holding its breath, watching, waiting. As I looked around the room, I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, like I was being watched. Every shadow seemed a little too dark, every sound a little too close. And then, just as I was about to turn away, I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere within the walls. I froze, listening, barely daring to breathe. The tapping continued, soft and steady, almost like a heartbeat, pulsing just behind the plaster. I took a step back, my pulse quickening, and as I moved, the sound stopped. Just like that, silence. I stood there, staring at the walls, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was nothing, no movement, no sound, just the rain outside and the quiet hum of the motel around me. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself it was just the pipes, or maybe the rain, but I couldn't ignore that feeling, that nagging thought that maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Have you ever stayed somewhere that just felt wrong? Like every corner, every shadow held something waiting, watching? Let us know in the comments below, because right now, in this room, with the rain and the silence closing in around me, I'm starting to wonder if I made a mistake. I set my bag down on the bed, but as I did, a strange sensation prickled at the back of my neck, a feeling like I wasn't alone, like there were eyes somewhere in the room, watching. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just nerves, exhaustion, and the rain making everything feel more oppressive. But that feeling, it didn't fade. The room was dimly lit by a small lamp on the nightstand, casting weak, pale light that seemed to make the shadows even darker. The wallpaper, once floral and vibrant, had faded to a sickly yellow, peeling at the edges and in some places torn completely, revealing dark spots underneath. The carpet was a dull, stained green, frayed around the edges, and there was a dark, almost reddish-brown stain near the foot of the bed that made my stomach twist. I didn't want to think about what might have caused it. Then, just as I began to unpack, I heard it again, a faint tapping coming from somewhere near the wall. I turned sharply, staring at the wall by the window, but nothing was there. The tapping continued, soft but rhythmic, almost like a pattern, like someone or something was trying to get my attention. Ignoring it, I took a shaky breath and opened the nightstand drawer, hoping to distract myself. Inside, there was an old book, the kind you might find in a hotel room, worn, with pages yellowed from age. But this one wasn't a Bible or a local guide. Instead, it was some kind of diary. No cover, just page after page of hurried, scrawled handwriting. I glanced through a few pages, and something about the entries made me uneasy. They were fragmented, strange notes about voices in the walls, shadows in the corners, and a sense of someone watching. A chill ran down my spine as I closed the book and tucked it back into the drawer, not wanting to read more. As I slid the drawer shut, something else caught my eye, a crumpled, torn photograph on the floor, half tucked under the bed. I reached down and picked it up, brushing off a thin layer of dust. It was an old black and white photo, faded and worn, of a man and a woman standing in front of a motel room that looked eerily similar to mine. Their expressions were blank, almost haunting, and as I stared at it, I noticed a small scribble on the back. Room 12, June 1968. A wave of dread settled over me, and I put the photograph back, sliding it deep under the bed where I found it. But as I straightened up, there was again that tapping, this time louder. I turned toward the window, expecting to see maybe a tree branch or something brushing against the glass. But the window was closed tight, and beyond it, there was nothing but rain and darkness. No branches, no trees, just shadows moving in the rain, their shapes twisting and warping under the dim parking lot light. Suddenly, I heard another sound, a soft whisper, barely audible, like someone murmuring just outside the door. I froze, straining to listen, but the whisper faded as quickly as it came. And then footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps, shuffling down the hallway, stopping just outside my room. My heart pounded as I stared at the door, holding my breath, waiting. The footsteps stopped, and for a long, tense moment, there was silence. Then, the sound of something sliding across the floor, just outside the door, followed by another faint whisper. I couldn't make out what it said, but the tone was low, almost pleading. Every instinct in my body screamed for me to leave, but I was rooted in place, caught between fear and curiosity. I glanced around the room, and for the first time, I noticed the little things left behind by others who had stayed here. A cracked mug on the shelf, an old, faded note tucked under the lamp, scribbled with words that had long since faded. It was as if traces of past visitors were woven into the very fabric of this place, like pieces of a puzzle that I didn't want to solve. And that's when I heard it, a soft creak, like the sound of a door opening somewhere nearby. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end as I turned, looking at the room around me, trying to find the source of the sound. But everything was still, silent, almost too still, like the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was hiding in the corners, lurking in the shadows, just beyond the reach of the lamp's weak light. Every shadow seemed to deepen. Every corner seemed to hold a presence just out of sight, watching. I felt trapped, hemmed in by the walls and the heavy, oppressive air, and for the first time, I seriously considered leaving, getting in my car, and driving away without looking back. Minutes ticked by, though it felt like hours. Every second, the room seemed to close in a little tighter, the air growing thicker, weighed down by the heavy scent of mildew and something else, a faint, metallic odor I couldn't place. My nerves were fraying, every small noise jolting through me, magnified by the silence and the relentless pounding of rain against the window. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a shadow shifting just outside the window. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, the rain casting strange shapes in the darkness. But as I looked closer, the shadow didn't go away. It was there, moving slowly, like someone or something was pacing back and forth. The shape was too tall, too solid to be a reflection or a trick of the rain. My heart raced, and I reached for my phone, but I didn't dare take my eyes off the window. I waited, breath held, watching as the figure paused, hovering right outside. But just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, melting back into the night. I forced myself to breathe, convincing myself it was just my imagination, nerves amplified by the isolation and the storm. But as I turned away, I could have sworn I heard something, a faint whisper, muffled by the glass, almost as if the shadow was speaking. I backed away, clutching my phone like a lifeline. I tried to distract myself, to shake off the sense of dread creeping up my spine. I walked over to the small table by the window, just to busy my hands, rearranging things out of some nervous instinct. But as I reached for my bag, there was a knock at the door. It was soft, barely more than a tap, but it stopped me in my tracks. I stared at the door, waiting, expecting the knock to come again, louder this time. But there was nothing. I took a cautious step forward, my eyes never leaving the door, and after a long, tense moment, I opened it. The hallway was empty, stretching out in both directions with no sign of movement. I glanced around, the silence pressing down on me, waiting for something to happen. But there was nothing, just the flickering light from the sconce and the sound of rain hammering down outside. I closed the door, a strange sense of relief washing over me. But as I turned back toward the room, something felt off. The chair by the window, where I'd set my bag just moments before, was slightly out of place, like it had been moved a few inches to the side. I frowned, trying to remember if I'd bumped it without realizing, but something in my gut told me I hadn't. It was as if someone had been there, just long enough to leave a subtle mark, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone. Then a second knock, louder this time, breaking through the quiet. I spun around, my heart pounding, and went to the door again. But as I looked through the peephole, the hallway was still empty, silent, untouched. I opened the door, my hand shaking, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever was behind this. But once again, nothing. As I stood there, straining to see anything in the dimly lit hall, a cold breeze brushed past me, as if someone had walked right by, invisible. I quickly shut the door, my pulse racing, the silence of the room now feeling oppressive, almost suffocating. And that's when I noticed it, my bag, now lying on the floor, as if it had been pushed. My hands were trembling as I picked it up, trying to convince myself it had simply fallen. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. It felt like I was being toyed with, like something unseen was moving around me, testing the boundaries, watching for my reaction. And then, the smell, stronger than before, sharp and metallic, filling the air. I covered my nose, but it lingered, thick and cloying, like rust or blood. I took a step back, my chest tightening, my heart racing as I scanned the room. Every shadow seemed to grow darker, every corner holding secrets I couldn't see. The rain outside intensified, pounding against the roof and walls, and thunder rumbled, deep and resonant, making the entire building tremble. The lights flickered, casting strange, shifting shadows that seemed to dance and twist, reaching out from the walls, stretching toward me. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I felt it, a cold, gentle touch on my shoulder, like a hand resting there for just a moment before retreating. I spun around, heart racing, but there was no one. Just empty air, the room's silent save for the rain and thunder. My skin prickled, and a shiver ran down my spine as I backed away, my gaze darting around, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I was alone, wasn't I? The thought echoed through my mind, the doubt gnawing at me, feeding the fear that was quickly spiraling out of control. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was here with me, hidden just beyond my sight, waiting. The tapping returned, louder this time, coming from the walls, the floor, the very structure of the room seeming to pulse with the sound. Each tap was rhythmic like a heartbeat, but somehow wrong, as if it didn't belong. I clutched my chest, breathing heavily, feeling like I was drowning in the darkness that now felt alive, pressing in from all sides. I couldn't shake the feeling that the motel was alive in some way, like the walls themselves were breathing, shifting with every passing second. It was as if the longer I stayed here, the more the place started to reveal its true nature, its twisted, hidden layers. I had to know more. I had to find answers. I couldn't stay cooped up in that room anymore, my nerves on edge, my heart racing with every creak and whisper. With a deep breath, I grabbed my flashlight and slipped out the door, making my way down the dark, silent hallway. The sound of the rain pounding outside seemed to get louder, the wind howling, but inside, the motel was eerily quiet. As I walked, I noticed something strange, an old, forgotten corridor, one I hadn't seen earlier. It was tucked away at the far end of the hall, hidden behind an old, cracked wooden door. I hesitated, but the curiosity tugged at me. I approached the door slowly, my fingers brushing the peeling paint as I pushed it open. The hinges groaned in protest, and the air inside was thick with dust and mildew, carrying the scent of something stagnant, something left untouched for years. The corridor was narrow, with flickering lights hanging from the ceiling, casting long, disorienting shadows. The walls were covered in yellowed wallpaper, faded and torn in places, exposing raw plaster underneath. As I walked deeper into the passage, I noticed the door on the left slightly ajar. The faint sound of muffled whispers drifted from inside. I pushed the door open cautiously, my flashlight cutting through the dark. Inside, the room was empty, except for the paintings. Rows of them, portraits of past guests, their faces frozen in fear, eyes wide, mouths agape. Each painting was different, but all of them shared the same disturbing expression of terror. The details were so vivid, so lifelike, that I could almost feel the panic in their gazes. One painting, in particular, stood out. A woman, her eyes locked with mine, an expression of sheer dread frozen on her face. I felt a chill run through me as I stepped closer, drawn to the image. As I reached out to touch it, the whispers grew louder, and I spun around, heart racing, to find the source. But there was no one, just the quiet hum of the flickering lights. I turned to leave, but as I stepped back into the corridor, I noticed another door at the far end, this one partially hidden behind a long, heavy curtain. I didn't know what compelled me, but I knew I had to check it out. The sense of being watched, the creeping fear, it was all becoming too much to ignore. As I approached, a strange feeling settled over me. It was almost like a pressure, as if the very air was thick with something unseen. The door opened with a sharp creak, revealing a dimly lit room with a single chair facing the corner. There was a figure sitting in it, a woman, elderly, hunched over, her hair thin and graying. She didn't move as I entered, didn't acknowledge my presence, but I could feel her gaze on me, heavy and unblinking. "Are you lost, dear?" Her voice was soft, but it sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't just her words, it was the way she spoke, as though she already knew everything about me, like she had seen countless others walk through these halls. I took a step forward, hesitating. I don't think so. I'm just trying to understand what's going on here." The woman slowly turned her head to face me, her eyes cloudy but sharp, holding a knowledge that chilled me. "You should leave," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't belong here." I frowned. "I can't leave yet. I need to know what's going on. Why is everything so strange here? Why do I feel like I'm being watched?" She sighed, a long, weary sound. "You're not the first to ask those questions, not the first to stay, but you're the first in a long time to ask about it. There's something here that doesn't want you to leave. Something that watches, always watches." My heart skipped a beat. "Oh, what's watching me?" "The Watcher," she whispered, her voice cracking with fear. "It's always here, always watching. It's the one who keeps us here, traps us in this place." Her eyes seemed to cloud over, as if lost in memories, and she fell silent for a moment. When she spoke again, it was as if she were telling a secret, one too terrible to bear. "It feeds on fear. It needs us to stay, to be afraid. It doesn't let us leave." I took a step back, my mind reeling. "You've been here for years?" "Yes," she replied, her voice barely audible. "I can't leave. None of us can. Not until we give it what it wants. And if you don't leave soon, it will want you too." A cold, sickening fear spread through me, and I felt the weight of her words settle into my bones. This wasn't just a motel. It was something far worse, a prison. A place where something darker waited in the shadows, always waiting. Suddenly, the room grew colder, the air thickening with a presence that seemed to fill every corner. The whispers grew louder, like a chorus of voices speaking all at once, too fast to understand. I turned to leave, my pulse pounding, but as I reached for the door, I noticed something written on the wall in a language I didn't recognize. Strange symbols carved into the plaster, glowing faintly in the dim light. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. The symbols, they seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, as if they were alive, watching me. I turned to the old woman, but she was no longer in the chair. She had vanished, just like the figures in the paintings. I was alone, or so I thought. A soft tap on the shoulder. I spun around, my heart pounding, but the room was empty. The Watcher was here, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could survive this motel. I couldn't breathe. The air felt like it was closing in on me, suffocating me. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what was happening, but my body was frozen in place, as if caught in the web of something far more sinister than I could ever imagine. The old woman's words echoed in my mind. "It feeds on fear. It doesn't let us leave." The motel, the rooms, the very walls seemed to pulse with a dark energy, as though they were alive. I turned, heart hammering in my chest, and that's when I saw it. A shadow. At first, it was just a flicker in the corner of my vision, a shift in the darkness, but then it grew, slowly, deliberately. It wasn't just any shadow, though. It was something else, something that shouldn't be there. The figure was tall, impossibly tall, and its shape was not human, not entirely. The air around it seemed to distort, as if it was an entity not meant to exist in this world. A void that swallowed up the light. I stepped backward, my legs trembling, my mind screaming to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The figure's presence seemed to draw the very heat from the room, leaving me in an icy grip that I couldn't escape. Its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, were dark voids, like black holes that stared into my soul, pulling everything out of me, leaving nothing behind. Then it spoke. Its voice was a rasp, like the whisper of 1,000 lost souls, echoing in my mind, not in my ears. "You shouldn't have come here," it said, the words crawling under my skin, sending a shiver down my spine. "You're just like the others." I couldn't respond. I wanted to scream, to shout, to beg for mercy, but my throat was dry, choked with fear. The figure took a step forward, its presence looming over me, a chill wrapping around my body like a vice. I had to get out. I turned, desperate to reach the door, but as I reached for the handle, my fingers slid off it as if it were coated in something slick. I yanked at it again, nothing. It wouldn't budge. Panic surged through me. My breath came in sharp, ragged gasps. The shadows around the room seemed to stretch and writhe, pulling at me, trying to drag me back into their depths. The figure moved closer, its presence becoming heavier, more oppressive with every passing second. "Please," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Let me out." But the door still wouldn't open. The darkness seemed to twist and bend around me, the walls closing in, and then came the laughter, soft at first, like a distant murmur, but growing louder, more twisted. It was a human laughter. It was something far worse, unnatural and human. The sound echoed off the walls, bouncing in my head like a broken record. The footsteps came next, slow and deliberate, moving closer with each passing second, as if the entity was savoring every moment of my fear. I turned around to face the watcher again. The figure was right there now, standing mere inches from me, its cold, black eyes fixed on mine, drilling into me with a hollow, empty stare. My legs gave way beneath me, and I collapsed onto the floor, powerless, paralyzed by the sheer weight of its gaze. The room seemed to tilt, the walls warping as if reality itself was bending under the pressure of the watcher's presence. A low, guttural voice rumbled from the darkness, the watcher's words sliding into my mind, seeping through every crack, every crevice of my consciousness. "You're mine now, just like all the others." My pulse thudded in my ears as I tried to push myself away, but my body felt heavy, like I was trapped in quicksand. The laughter grew louder, more maddening, as if the entire motel were laughing with it, mocking my helplessness. The floor beneath me seemed to tremble, as if the very foundation of the building was shaking with the entity's power. "No!" I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the dark. In that moment, I knew I was truly alone. There was no escape. The watcher had claimed me. Its laughter echoed through my mind as it stepped closer, its form stretching impossibly tall, as if it were to consume me whole. But then something strange happened. The sound of thunder outside grew deafening, the rain pounding against the windows, the wind howling like a beast. It was as if the storm outside had found its way into the motel, crashing violently against the walls, shaking the very room apart. And in the midst of the chaos, I saw something else, a flicker of light, brief, but bright enough to catch my attention. It was the flash of the neon sign outside, flickering erratically as if struggling against the darkness. Could it be a chance, an opportunity? I lunged forward with every ounce of strength I had left. The entity reached for me, its cold, skeletal fingers grazing my arm. But I was faster. I yanked the door open with a scream, the sound of the wind and rain rushing into the room, as if nature itself was trying to reclaim what was rightfully its own. I stumbled out into the hallway, frantic, my heart pounding in my chest, the watcher's laughter ringing in my ears. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ran, my feet pounding against the floor, my breath ragged in my chest. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly before me, but all I could think of was escaping, getting as far away from that room as possible. But the laughter didn't stop. It followed me, echoing down the halls, growing louder, as if it were all around me, filling every corner of the motel. It was then that I realized, no matter how fast I ran, no matter how far I went, the watcher was always there, lurking, waiting for the moment I'd slip. And no matter where I went, it would find me again. The cold air stung my face as I ran, my breath coming in sharp gasps, every step a desperate lunge away from the nightmare that I had just lived. The rain lashed down, soaking me to the bone, but it was nothing compared to the icy grip of fear that clung to me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran, faster and faster, until my legs burned and my lungs screamed for air. But in the pit of my stomach, there was something darker than exhaustion, something that told me, no matter how far I ran, I wasn't free. The storm raged around me, thunder cracking above, the flashes of lightning briefly illuminating the dark road ahead. I kept moving, my feet slapping against the wet pavement, my body soaked and trembling. The motel was behind me, a black silhouette fading into the distance. I had escaped, or so I thought. After what felt like an eternity, I reached my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling so violently I could barely get the door open. Finally, I climbed in, slamming the door shut behind me as I locked it with a hurried click. For the first time since entering that cursed place, I allowed myself to breathe, though it was shallow and ragged. I started the engine, the sound of the car roaring to life, and I pulled away from the motel. It was over. Or was it? As I glanced back in my rearview mirror, I saw the motel in the distance. The neon sign was no longer flickering, no longer lighting up the dark night. It was completely dark, as if the building itself had vanished into the shadows. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. No. What froze my blood was the eerie sensation that I wasn't alone in the car. That feeling like I was being watched had returned tenfold. I could almost feel those black eyes on me, the ones from the watcher, penetrating through the back of my skull. I told myself it was just my imagination, a result of the fear and adrenaline that had been coursing through my body for hours. But deep down, something inside me knew. It wasn't over. I didn't stop driving until I reached my apartment. Somehow, the journey felt longer than it should have, each minute stretching into eternity. I parked the car and stumbled inside, locking the door behind me. My heart was still pounding in my chest, my hands slick with sweat, but at least I was safe. At least I was home, or so I thought. That night, I tried to sleep, but the nightmares came. In them, the watcher was always there, standing just beyond my reach, its eyes following me as I ran through endless halls. I woke up in a cold sweat, gasping for breath, my heart thudding in my ears. But even in the waking hours, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the nightmares. It wasn't just the cold chills creeping down my spine at random moments. No, it was something else, something much more tangible. Late that evening, after I had settled into my living room, the sounds began. Soft at first, a distant tapping like fingers on glass. Then a creak like a floorboard underfoot. It was the same noises I had heard in the motel room, echoing in my apartment, coming from all directions. I told myself it was just the building settling, just my mind playing tricks on me after everything I had been through. But the noises persisted, growing more insistent, more real. The tapping, the creaking, and then the soft, low whisper, just like the one I had heard in the hallway. My heart dropped into my stomach. It wasn't possible. The motel, the watcher, they were gone, weren't they? I stood up, my legs shaking, and walked toward the door. I reached for the handle, my hand hovering just above it, as the whisper came again, clearer now. You can never leave. I froze. I didn't want to believe it. But the more I stood there, listening to the whispering wind, the more certain I became. The watcher had followed me. The motel wasn't just a place. It was an entity, a prison, a nightmare that reached far beyond its physical walls. As I reached into my pocket, feeling the cold fabric against my fingers, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. Something small, a piece of paper, crumpled and worn, like it had been hidden for years. I pulled it out, my hand shaking, and opened it carefully, as though it might disintegrate in my touch. It was a torn photograph. The edges were frayed, the image faded, but there, unmistakably, was the same room I had stayed in, the same faded wallpaper, the same dusty carpet. But there was something else. In the corner of the photograph, standing by the bed, was a shadowy figure, a silhouette, and beneath it, written in a hurried, almost frantic scrawl, were the words, "You're one of us now." I dropped the photograph, the room spinning around me. The whispering grew louder, the tapping more persistent, as though the walls themselves were closing in. I could feel the watcher's presence, right behind me, watching, waiting, and then I heard it, the faint sound of footsteps coming closer, closer, as though something or someone was following me, inch by inch. I turned toward the door, my pulse hammering in my throat, but before I could even reach for the handle, the lights flickered. Then, everything went pitch black. The darkness was all-encompassing, suffocating. And in that suffocating blackness, I heard the watcher's voice again, low and menacing. "You can't escape." As the darkness of the room pressed in around me, I could feel my heart racing, pounding so violently it seemed to echo through every corner of the space. The whispers, now unmistakably urgent, circled me like vultures. "You can never leave," they repeated, each word dripping with malice. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as a cold, almost tangible dread gripped me. But as I stood there, paralyzed, unable to move, a single thought crept into my mind. This wasn't the end of my nightmare. It couldn't be. The watcher, that figure who had haunted every corner of the motel, the one who made every room feel like a tomb, hadn't just disappeared when I fled. No, it was still there, lurking, waiting, and if I was being honest with myself, I knew. The motel had never really let me go. No one ever truly escapes it. The watcher always finds its guests again. I could feel it now, the chilling touch of its eyes upon me, even in the dark. The sound of footsteps echoed in the silence. Slow, methodical, relentless. The door, once a barrier between me and the nightmare, seemed to pulse with life, a mocking reminder that I could never outrun what was coming for me. And just as I reached for the door again, to flee from this new wave of terror, it slammed shut on its own, with a force so violent it rattled the walls. The sound of it echoed in my skull. My fate was sealed. If you made it to the end, congratulations. You're braver than most. Hit that like button to show your support for more spine-chilling stories. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever felt the presence of something you couldn't explain? Share your own stories with us. And remember, sometimes the scariest places follow you home. Stay safe, and until next time, don't let the shadows catch up to you.